Happy October, everyone. The best month of the year is finally here, and I was able to time up this review series so that to kick off Halloween season, we'd be able to talk about the first one I saw in theaters, Rob Zombie's Halloween. Even though fans and critics both seem to hate Halloween Resurrection, it managed to take in $37 million during its theatrical run. The rule of thumb I've heard is that to be profitable, a horror movie has to make about 3 times its budget, and since it cost $13 million, there's a pretty good chance it didn't break even. But instead of letting the series take a break like they probably should have, the Akkad set to work on rebooting the entire franchise from the very beginning with Rob Zombie. I have mixed feelings about his movies, but I've always respected the fact that he just decided to make movies one day and willed them into existence with fairly wide theatrical runs. He was also friends with John Carpenter, who told him to go for it and make it his own thing, which is exactly what he did. And I gotta be honest with you guys, some of the ideas Rob Zombie was bringing into this remake were pretty cool. He of course wanted us to have the prequel bits so we'd be able to see how a child could turn into Michael Myers. He also wanted us to see why Michael has a connection to the mask, and of course he wanted to turn Dr. Loomis into, well, more of a doctor. The only problem is he took it a little too far. But now we have the backstory, so let's get into the movie. Halloween starts out with a quote from Dr. Loomis, and as far as I can tell, this isn't from the original Halloween, so it's a little weird because he's a fictional character. It does tell us where Rob Zombie is coming from though in terms of his take on Michael this time around. The first scene of this movie tells you everything you need to know going into it as far as what kind of movie it's gonna be. You've got a white trash family featuring William Forsythe screaming at Sherry Moon Zombie, Judith coming downstairs to call her mom a whore, and Michael in the bathroom tearing a rat apart while his baby sister howls at the top of her lungs. It's like the Rob Zombie starter pack.
Ah! Fucking whore! Alright, now clean it up!
Dag Furch, which is how I think you say his name, and I'm sure you guys will be happy to tell me I'm wrong down in the comments below, plays the 10-year-old version of Michael Myers in this movie, and it still feels like a weird choice 11 years later. Going back to that quote at the beginning, the idea here is that the scariest people are the ones who learn how to hide the fact that they're crazy from everyone around them. But I just can't see this little kid growing up to be Tyler Mane, who's almost 7 feet tall. It's like if I grew up to be Jason Momoa. It's not gonna happen. I really like the tone Rob Zombie established with the first act. The daytime scenes feature a nice amber color grade, and the extreme close-ups and handheld shots paired with the 70s fashion and soundtrack give it a really raw, grindhousey feel, which is something I've always appreciated in his movies. Michael runs out of school while his mom is talking to the principal and Dr. Loomis, and it's the first time we get to hear the iconic Halloween theme. I know it's there because Zombie wants to let us know that Michael's about to take a human life, but I think it feels out of place. I think it should have been saved for when he breaks out of Smith's Grove, but that's just my opinion. Damn, man, Junie from Spy Kids went down like a bitch. Michael's first kill is underwhelming to say the least. I get that because he's a kid killing another kid, they can't really show or hang on it for too long, but the more I watch this movie, the more I think this scene should have been cut since the bully is such a cliche plot device to begin with. And on top of that, it's only 10 minutes later that Michael slits William Forsythe's throat, and that would have been a much more effective first kill in my opinion. Of course, since this is Rob Zombie we're talking about, we have to have a way too long scene featuring his wife getting naked, and this time it's set to Love Hurts by Nazareth. I guess what Rob Zombie's trying to say is that Michael only loves his mom and thinks she doesn't deserve the shitty situation she's in, but it's pretty obvious from go that she got herself into it, so I don't really get the tone here. We get to see the new mask pretty early in this movie, even though Michael isn't the one wearing it, and I have to say, not considering this year's mask, it's the best since the original. A lot of you guys think Halloween 6 has the best since the original, but I disagree with that wholeheartedly. It's a little more defined, but when you compare them side by side, this is almost identical to the original mask. And speaking of that scene where Michael kills William Forsythe, Judith, and her boyfriend, there really isn't much to criticize there. Each kill has Rob Zombie's classic brutality factor, and he gives Michael weapons that make it believable that he'd be able to get the upper hand on Judith and her boyfriend enough to be able to kill them. I also appreciate that they didn't add in all those whack sound effects like a sword noise when he raises the knife, and the remixed music from the original fits better here than the iconic theme did when he killed Junie from Spy Kids. It's also pretty cool that it changes things up from the original movie while serving up the same purpose to the plot, even if he does look a little goofy in the oversized mask. The second act of Halloween takes place 11 months later in Smith's Grove. Malcolm McDowell is a great choice for Dr. Loomis. He really commits to the role and makes it his own, but doesn't radically alter the character, which I think is an important touch. Danny Trejo plays Michael's only friend from this point forward, and I always wondered if the advice he was giving was ad-lib since Danny Trejo was in and out of prison for some crazy shit in the earlier part of his life. Michael takes takes the advice to heart and sort of retreats into his mind from that point forward, and this is where I guess I can start to see Dag Furch transitioning into Tyler Mane. It still feels off, but I can see it. The reason the first and second act don't work for me is because they're individually way too long on top of a movie that's already way too long. I feel like if Rob Zombie took it back to the editing bay and made sure it was 90 minutes and he cut out a lot of the school stuff, the first kill, and some of the interview montage stuff when Michael's a kid in Smith's Grove, the movie would be overall better paced and just a better movie at the end of the day.
Fuck you, world! I hate you! That's a fuck off!
Yeah, we definitely could have used a lot less of that too. Sherry Moon Zombie killing herself is just so cliche and honestly cringy. It's not like Rob Zombie was breaking new ground by having Michael come from a white trash family or anything, but this scene is so needlessly bleak that it pushes the movie to a new level of cringe. It's presented as a plot device since Rob Zombie chose to go with Laurie being Michael's sister for this one, which made a lot of sense at the time, but he could have easily had the state put the baby into witness protection or had Sherry Moon give it up for adoption after the murders or something and called her an unfit mother.
I'll be a shitstorm in your worst nightmare, motherfucker. I'll
It's
come in
so
here and
boring,
fuck this
just let him
place up
kill
and
someone
smash
already. One thing this movie definitely didn't need is a rape scene. This guy already spent over a minute explaining that if Michael looked at him wrong, he'd come in and wreck all his masks, so why didn't Zombie just use that as a crutch for Michael's escape? Sure, it feels good to see these pieces of shit get killed, but it paints Michael in a sympathetic light, and that's stupid. I'm telling you right now, if I'm working a minimum wage job at a mental hospital and I walk in and see that, I'm turning around and walking right back out the door. After Michael breaks out of Smith's Grove, the movie goes into overdrive and starts to pick up, but just a little bit. Ken Foree shows up and totally owns his role. He decides to take a shit and jack off at the same time, which seems like a good way to piss in your own face. Michael busts in and kills him for his jumpsuit, and after that, we're introduced to Rob Zombie's idea of normal people. Laurie's dad is still a real estate agent, but Laurie is a lot more like Annie in this movie. Instead of being the quiet, intelligent, good girl, she's making jokes about fucking the owner of the local hardware store. Speaking of Annie, her and Linda are pretty much the same characters this time around, but I bet you'll be surprised to hear that they're played over the top just like every other character in this goddamn movie. I think it's kind of cool that Danielle Harris came back, but I don't like that she spends the last half of the movie with her tits out. Sid Haig plays the graveyard caretaker, which is a fun cameo, and Brad Dourif fills in the role of Sheriff Brackett. It's weird seeing him play a good guy after all those years hearing him voice Chucky, but I think he's a great person for the role nonetheless.
I know whose grave that is.
Finally! I truly don't understand why Michael even bothers going after Laurie's parents, or how he even knows that Laurie is his sister for that matter. It's not like Loomis would tell him, and he sure as shit didn't have internet access while he was in Smith's Grove, so what's going on? Brackett explains that he found Laurie when he responded to Sherry Moon's suicide, omitted her from the report, and dropped her off at the hospital, so how the hell does Michael even know who she is? He does pull out that picture of him and his baby sister, but there's no fucking way he'd be able to identify an 18-year-old adult from a baby picture. The last hour of Halloween really drags, and it's for a few reasons. The first is that Rob Zombie relies heavily on the plot and set pieces of the original movie, but with an increased brutality factor. Because of that, for a lot of the last act, we're just seeing a new version of what we already know, which is cool at first, but gets boring after a while. Second, Loomis is barely utilized, and when he is, it's not very well. He spends a bunch of time convincing Brackett to go out and find Michael with him, but you barely see him after that, and finally, the pacing is terrible. There's a ton of random exposition to pad it out when it should be quick and relentless like the original. There also has to be something supernatural going on with Michael, despite the homegrown psychopath angle the first half of the movie takes. He gets shot directly in the chest, he gets stabbed through the collarbone with a knife that's easily long enough to reach his heart, and he takes 3 bullets to the back from Loomis, and none of it manages to slow him down. There's just no fucking way he isn't immortal. The last sequence in this movie involves Michael stalking Laurie through his house, and it's about 10 minutes longer than it should be. Laurie falls through the ceiling, which is hilarious, and then Michael runs out the second-story window and takes her with him. She somehow doesn't die, and then she shoots him in the head with the last bullet in Loomis's .45, and it cuts to credits. Rob Zombie's Halloween at the end of the day is better than Resurrection, but that's not really a high bar to clear, and the first half of the movie is pretty boring. I thought the idea of adding in Smith's Grove and stuff was interesting, but the way Rob Zombie handles it just pads it out way too much, and kind of just makes me wish it wasn't in there at all. And also, the second half of this movie is just really paying homage to the original Halloween, so that just makes you ask, what's the point of even making it? His take on on Laurie Strode is straight up terrible. He has no idea when and where to use John Carpenter's iconic theme, and I know going over the top is kind of his MO, but this movie plays out a lot more like 31 than The Devil's Rejects. I know it has its fans out there, but I'm not one of them. And that's what I think of Rob Zombie's Halloween. So of course my next review is gonna be of its sequel, but it's just kind of nice to have a light at the end of the tunnel. I get to talk about the good Halloween movies after that. I also wanted to thank you guys for commenting and let me know what other franchises you wanted me to take a look at next. I think Friday the 13th won, followed by Scream and then A Nightmare on Elm Street, so you guys gave me a lot to talk about. Be sure to let me know what you think of this movie and my review down in the comments below. And anyways guys, my name is Jimmy Champagne and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.